The next few years were the darkest of my life. I burned through my savings quickly. A professor's salary doesn't prepare you for extended unemployment. I lost my house, my car, my entire lifestyle. I took whatever jobs I could find. I worked at a hardware store, taught high school math for a semester, and did freelance technical writing for trade publications. None of it lasted long. Somehow, word would always get back to employers about my difficult history. I moved from Boston to Chicago, hoping a change of scenery would help. I found work with a cleaning company, doing janitorial services for office buildings. It was honest work, but it was also invisible work. For the first time in my adult life, I was truly anonymous. There was something both devastating and liberating about that invisibility. I was no longer Dr. Elijah Hayes, controversial former professor. I was just Elijah, the guy who emptied trash cans and mopped floors. After a few years of floating between different cleaning companies, I found a stable position at Langston Innovations. It was a growing tech company, the kind of place where I might have consulted or taught in my previous life, walking through their halls. Seeing the young engineers and their cutting-edge projects was initially painful. These were my people, working on problems I understood better than most. But I was invisible to them, just another member of the cleaning crew. Gradually, though, I began to find a different kind of satisfaction in my work. When I fixed a printer that IT had declared beyond repair, or replaced a ballast that had been causing headaches for weeks, I was solving problems. Small problems, unnoticed problems, but problems nonetheless. I developed a routine. I'd arrive at 6 a.m., before most employees, and work through the building systematically. I knew every corner, every system, every recurring issue. I became the invisible backbone that kept things running smoothly. The beautiful thing about being invisible is that people talk around you as if you're not there. Over the years, I overheard thousands of conversations, meetings, and technical discussions. I learned about Langston's projects, their challenges, and their failures. I'd listen to engineers struggling with algorithm problems I'd solved decades earlier. I'd hear executives making decisions about technology they didn't fully understand. I'd watch brilliant young minds reinventing solutions to problems I'd already figured out. Sometimes it was frustrating. I'd want to speak up, to share what I knew, to help, but I'd learned to keep quiet. I was the janitor. My job was to clean, not to think, but I kept thinking anyway. In my small apartment, I'd work through the problems I'd overheard, sketching solutions in my old notebooks. Not because I planned to use them, but because I couldn't stop myself. The engineer in me was still alive, even if the world couldn't see him. 5 years into my time at Langston, a young intern named Zoe Mitchell caught my attention. She was different from the other students, more observant, more questioning. She'd make eye contact when she passed me in the halls, sometimes even say hello. When she saw me fix the elevator button that had stumped multiple engineers, she didn't just walk away. She asked questions, real questions about how I'd diagnosed the problem, why my solution worked when others had failed. "Did you just fix that?" she asked, surprise evident in her voice. "Simple wiring issue," I replied, already wheeling my cart away. The maintenance team said it needed a part that wouldn't arrive until next week. 2 engineers tried this morning and couldn't figure it out. Sometimes things just need a gentle touch, I said. But I could see in her eyes that she wasn't satisfied. With that answer, she was the first person in years to look at me and see something more than just the janitor. Everything changed on that Friday morning in the executive parking lot. Clayton Ryker's prototype vehicle, the same one I'd been hearing about in meetings for months, wouldn't start. I knew that car better than the engineers who'd designed it. I'd been listening to their technical discussions, understanding their problems, seeing their mistakes, the recursive loop issue they couldn't solve. I'd written papers about that exact problem in 1994. When Clayton made his mocking challenge, "Fix this, and the car is yours," I saw it for what it was, an opportunity to stop being invisible, even if just for a moment. As I approached the vehicle, muscle memory took over. My hands traced the wiring paths with confidence I hadn't felt in years. I could feel the problem in the system, understand how the components were miscommunicating with each other. 2 taps on a junction box, 2 adjusted wires. That's all it took. When the car hummed to life, the silence in that parking lot was deafening. For the first time in 15 years, I had been seen. Zoe's curiosity about me intensified after the car incident. She started investigating, using her access to academic databases and online archives. Slowly, she pieced together my past, my publications, my patents, my abrupt disappearance from the academic world. When she confronted me with what she'd found, I initially tried to deflect, but something in her voice, her genuine concern, broke through my defenses. "MIT and tech dynamics," she said softly. "You were a mechanical engineer. You taught at MIT, you published papers on adaptive learning systems 20 years before anyone else was thinking about them." For the first time in years, I found myself telling someone the truth about my past, about Marcus, about the whisper, about the blacklisting, about how I'd gone from being at the forefront of AI research to being invisible. "Life takes turns, Miss Mitchell," I told her. But she wasn't satisfied with that answer either. Clayton's reaction to the viral video was predictable. His authority had been questioned, his expertise challenged by a janitor. He couldn't let that stand. The board meeting he described, the million views, the questions about his leadership, it was all true. But what he didn't mention was how scared he was, not just of losing his job, but of what I represented. Proof that he didn't understand the technology his company was built on. When he called me to his office, I knew what was coming. Another test, another challenge, another opportunity for him to prove that I was just lucky. There's a core algorithm in our self-learning vehicle that's been stalling development for months, he said. Fix it, and I'll triple your pay. The recursive loop problem, the same issue that had killed Marcus 20 years earlier, the same flaw I'd been warning about since the beginning. I'll need the schematics, I said, the real ones, not the simplified versions your team uses for presentations. His surprise at my confidence was obvious. He'd expected me to be intimidated, to back down. Instead, I was making demands. But walking into the R&D lab during business hours was surreal. I hadn't been in a proper engineering environment in almost 2 decades. The tools had changed, the interfaces were different, but the fundamental problems remained the same. The engineers stopped their conversations to stare at me, some with curiosity, some with skepticism, some with barely concealed hostility. Who was this janitor to think he could solve problems they'd been working on for months? Dr. Wilson Gardner approached me with genuine respect. Dr. Hayes, I read your paper on predictive algorithmic patterns back in grad school. It changed my entire approach to programming. For a moment, I was transported back to my teaching days, when my work mattered, when people valued my insights. But Clayton's sharp interruption brought me back to reality. As I began examining the schematics, the problems became immediately clear. The team had overcomplicated the system, adding layers of complexity to solve symptoms rather than addressing the root cause. You've got a recursion problem, I told them. But it's not just recursion. Your system is creating data loops that feed back into the decision matrix without proper filtering. The explanation that followed felt like stepping back in time, teaching, guiding, sharing knowledge. It was who I'd been before I became invisible. And for the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Clayton's restriction of my system access was predictable but short-sighted. He wanted me to fail publicly, to prove that the car incident was just luck. But he underestimated what I could accomplish with just a pencil and paper. Sometimes limitations foster creativity, I told Zoe as I began sketching out solutions by hand. Before computers, we designed systems with pencil and paper. Let's go old school. For 3 hours, I worked the way I used to work in my academic days, pure thought, mathematical elegance, systematic problem solving. The solution that emerged was simpler and more robust than anything the team had attempted. When we tested it, and the simulation ran flawlessly, the spontaneous applause felt like vindication, not just for that moment, but for 20 years of being invisible. But Clayton's sabotage attempts made one thing clear. I wasn't welcome there. Not as an equal, not as a colleague. I was useful to them, but I would never truly belong. When Zoe told me about Clayton's deliberate attempts to make me fail, something shifted inside me. The patient acceptance I'd cultivated over years of invisibility gave way to a quiet dignity I hadn't felt in decades. I think I'm done here, I told her. Walking out of that lab, past the engineers who were calling out questions, felt like walking away from my old life all over again. But this time, it was my choice. Zoe's live stream changed everything. Her methodical demonstration of my solution, her explanation of Clayton's sabotage, her passionate defense of overlooked talent, it resonated with millions of people. The headlines that followed were surreal. CEO tries to bury janitor's genius fix. Black maintenance worker solves unsolvable tech problem. The janitor who outsmarted Silicon Valley. My phone started buzzing with calls from reporters, job offers from tech companies, and invitations to speak at conferences. The world that had rejected me 20 years ago suddenly wanted me back. But I'd learned something important during those years of invisibility. Recognition isn't about titles or corner offices. It's about the work itself, about solving problems that matter. The job offers were overwhelming. Vector Dynamics offered me a CTO position with a team of 50 engineers and stock options worth millions. Other companies made similar propositions, each trying to outbid the others for the genius janitor who'd gone viral. Nathan Kessler, my former student who'd betrayed me 20 years earlier, reached out with an apology and his offer. Sitting across from him in that Chicago cafe, I saw the guilt he'd carried for 2 decades. I was 28, terrified of losing my first real job, he said. I was wrong. They were wrong, and people died because of it. His offer was generous, senior technical advisor, my lab, complete autonomy. But Zoe's warning about Vector Dynamics, questionable ethics reminded me of why I'd been blacklisted in the first place. Nathan, why does a company with your track record want someone like me? I asked. Someone who's known for prioritizing ethics over profit. His answer that I'd be a reputation laundromat told me everything I needed to know. The speaking engagement at the West Coast Tech Summit was different. Catherine Barnes, CEO of Vector Dynamics, was using me to embarrass Clayton, but she was also giving me a platform to tell my story. Standing on that stage, looking out at an auditorium full of tech executives and engineers, I felt a strange calm. For 30 minutes, I told my story not with bitterness, but with the quiet wisdom of someone who'd seen the industry from both the highest heights and the humblest positions. The mind doesn't age, I said toward the end. It doesn't care what uniform you wear or what title you hold. It just needs someone to believe in it again. The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. But more important than the applause was the conversation it started about overlooked talent, about the dangers of corporate culture that values titles over ability. When Langston offered me a consulting position, no titles, no politics, just solving problems that interested me, it felt right. Not because I needed their validation, but because I could work on my terms. Zoe's mentorship program, which she named Hayes Labs, became my real focus. Working with overlooked talent, people who'd been invisible like I had been, reminded me why I'd loved engineering in the first place. My nephew Jameer getting accepted to MIT felt like a full circle moment. You're not just building machines, Uncle Elijah, he told me. You're building a legacy. The prototype car they'd given me became a symbol of everything that had changed. Driving it home from San Francisco, taking the scenic route through small towns and national parks. I had time to think about the journey. The AI navigation system worked flawlessly, using algorithms I'd helped refine. Every decision it made was based on principles I'd developed decades earlier. In a way, my work had been guiding people safely home all along, even when no one knew my name. Stopping at Marcus's grave in Chicago, I finally felt like I could tell him the story had come full circle. You wouldn't believe the month I've had, Marcus, I said softly. People are listening again. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd lost everything trying to prevent the kind of accident that killed Marcus 20 years later. I'd found redemption by fixing the same type of system that had failed him. Back in my small apartment, surrounded by old journals and technical papers I'd kept hidden for decades, I allowed myself to revisit the work that had once defined me. But this time, it felt different. Not like looking backward, but like building forward. The consulting work with Langston, the mentorship program with Zoe, the speaking engagements, they were all part of something larger. A second chance to do things right, to build technology that helps people without compromising ethics. Nathan's apology, 20 years too late, was both painful and healing. Seeing him successful and respected while I'd been invisible had been one of the hardest parts of my exile, but his guilt, his genuine remorse, helped me understand that my choices had been right, even if the cost had been enormous. I've drafted emails to you every year on the anniversary of the hearing. He told me never sent them. His offer to make amends through a lucrative position was tempting, but I'd learned something important. Integrity isn't something you can buy back. It's something you live with, day by day, choice by choice. Returning to MIT as a visitor, sitting in the back of a lecture hall, listening to students discuss adaptive learning systems, was profoundly moving. These young minds were building on foundations I'd helped lay, exploring questions I'd first formulated decades ago. They would never know who I was, sitting quietly in the back row, but in some small way, my work lived on through theirs. The ideas I'd developed in academic obscurity had become part of the fundamental knowledge that guided new generations of engineers. Working with the student team on their navigating vehicle reminded me why I'd loved teaching. The pure joy of watching someone understand a complex concept, the excitement of solving problems that seemed impossible, the satisfaction of building something that worked. The diversity-led tech incubator that Zoe created became my real passion. Project Beyond the Badge was designed to find overlooked talent, people like me who'd been invisible, dismissed, or forgotten. The maintenance worker who understood complex systems better than the engineers who designed them, the security guard who'd taught himself programming, the cafeteria worker who'd been silently solving logistics problems for years. Everyone deserves to be seen, Zoe told the HR team. Elijah Hayes isn't the only hidden genius out there. My story resonated with people because it touched on something fundamental, the way we see value in others. For 20 years, I'd been invisible not because I lacked ability, but because I lacked the right credentials, the right connections, the right circumstances. How many other brilliant minds are out there, overlooked and undervalued? How many janitors, security guards, and maintenance workers have insights that could change the world if only someone would listen? The viral video wasn't just about one man fixing a car. It was about challenging assumptions, about looking beyond titles and uniforms to see the human potential underneath. Today, I work on my terms. I consult for companies that share my values. I mentor young engineers who remind me of myself at their age. I speak at conferences about the importance of ethical technology development. The prototype car sits in my modest garage, a reminder of how far I've come. But the real satisfaction comes from the work itself, solving problems that matter, building systems that help people, teaching the next generation to think critically about the technology they create. People ask me if I'm bitter about the 20 years I lost, the recognition that came too late, the opportunities that were denied. The honest answer is complicated. I'm sad about Marcus, about the waste of talent, about the systems that punish truth tellers, but I'm not bitter. Those 20 years of invisibility taught me something valuable. Who you are isn't determined by what others think of you. It's determined by what you do when no one is watching. I fixed things when no one noticed. I solved problems when no one cared. I kept learning when no one was listening. That's who I am, not the famous genius janitor from the viral video, but the man who never stopped being an engineer, even when the world couldn't see it. The recognition is nice. The vindication feels good, but the real satisfaction comes from knowing that I stayed true to myself, even when it cost me everything. And now, as I work with the next generation of engineers, I tell them the same thing I learned during those years of invisibility. The work matters more than the recognition. The problems you solve matter more than the credit you get. The principles you uphold matter more than the consequences you face. That's my story. From the heights of academic success to the depths of invisibility, and back to something I never expected to find. Purpose on my terms. The journey isn't over. There are still problems to solve, still young minds to mentor, still systems to build that will make the world a little bit safer, a little bit better. And sometimes, late at night in my small apartment, I pull out my old notebooks and work on new ideas. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because somewhere out there, the next generation of engineers is struggling with problems I might be able to help them solve. That's who I am, Elijah Hayes, engineer. Not because of what others call me, but because of what I choose to do. Every single day. The mind doesn't age. It doesn't care about titles or uniforms. It just needs someone to believe in it again. And finally, after 20 years of invisibility, I believe in myself again too.